Thank you for joining us for the seminar today. I'd just like to introduce you to our panelists before we go into their presentations, and then have a bit of discussion between ourselves, and then open up the Q&A to the audience. So we're joined today by Godfrey Ekhator, who since August 2023 has been a lecturer in the history department at the University of Benin in Nigeria. He's also a research fellow at the Institute for Benin Studies, and presently the executive secretary of the Institute and a fellow of the French Institute for Research in Africa. And also a member of the Lagos Studies Association, and his ongoing PhD research is focused on the cultural history of the Benin people and kingdom. We're also joined by his colleague, Imogen Coulson, who since October 2021 has worked for Digital Benin, where she established conceptual content and data-driven processes for the project. In 2022, she gathered all new and updated object data from institutions and worked on the processing, structuring, and enhancing of metadata of all archival materials that can be seen in the archive space. She previously worked at the British Museum as a project curator for the Lower Niger Bronzes Research Project. And we're also joined by Dr. Tim Livsey, who has a particular interest in histories of knowledge and urban space. He's an assistant professor at Northumberland University and is currently principal investigator on the AHRC Research Development and Engagement Fellowship, Stolen Archives, Re-evaluating the British Migrated Archives and Decolonization. Tim's first book, Nigeria's University Age, Reframing Decolonization and Development, was published in 2017. So yeah, those are our panelists. And if I can invite Imogen and Godfrey to start their presentations, that'd be great.
Hi, great. I will just start sharing the screen. So hopefully everyone can see the presentation now. Great. All right then. And let me just also bring up the cursor. Great. So today, Godfrey and I are going to be speaking about the Digital Benin project that we've both been part of for a few years now. And I would also just like to start by saying thank you to Jenny for introducing us, and also thank you to Liz and to the committee for inviting us to be part of this series. It's really great to be able to speak about the project within this context. So just before I begin as well, today within this PowerPoint, I'll mainly be sharing screenshots of the platform, and we've always included URLs of the relevant pages, but this is really just because often when screen sharing through a PowerPoint presentation and then on Zoom, it becomes quite difficult to show the platform to its sort of full potential. So yeah, hopefully you will still be able to see everything within the slides. We've tried to make everything nice and big, but just to be aware. So to begin, just start with a little bit of an overview of the project. So the project began in 2020 and has had 3 phases. The first 2 phases were funded by the Ernst von Siemens Kunststiftung, and it's really the work that we did in these 2 phases, and in particular in 2022 to 2023, that we'll focus on today in our presentations. And the project Digital Benin really evolved out of discussions from the Benin Dialogue Group, and the initial focus was on bringing together data about objects that were looted by British forces in 1897 from the Kingdom of Benin. And the platform has currently now 7 spaces. One of those is this map view, which shows the locations of where objects are held today around the world. And quite strikingly, the majority of the objects are located in Europe and also in North America, with only 2 museum collections in Nigeria. Each of these pins represents one institution. The darker the color, the more objects are held at that institution as well. So yeah, that also helps to give an insight into the amounts of objects that are held in each of these. And so this map was one of those spaces that we focused on developing in between 2020 and 2022. And alongside this, we also have the catalogue space, where there are over 5,000 objects held across these institutions around the world. And within this space, you can not only look at the object data that was shared with us by institutions, both photographs and metadata, But there is also Digital Benin research alongside that seeks to situate those objects within research that has been done about the objects from the Kingdom of Benin, but also within Edo-centered knowledge. And that in particular is seen through the Edo designations that our colleague Osaisonor worked on, where we aimed to bring the names for the objects in Edo to the platform so that they could be shown alongside their names, alongside the vocalization of those terms in the Edo language. So this is sort of one aspect of the platform, and in some ways the objects here could be classified as one sort of dispersed collection, one that was looted by the British forces and in the years following 1897. And we really wanted to expand this to include the archival and photographic collections, which dispersed through different mechanisms and in different ways, sort of in a longer history, both before 1897, but also after 1897, in particular the colonial archives, and also archival material and photographs that relates to the provenance of the objects afterwards. But before we get into that, I will pass over to Godfrey to speak a little bit about a kind of concept that drives and shapes the platform. So I'll hand over to you, Godfrey.
Thank you very much, Imogen. And thank you for inviting me to this seminar. Well, as Imogen have rightly said, the Digital Benin projects have been on for a couple of years. And one of the driving ideas of this project in the second phase of the project was to understand what this object means to the Benin people and bringing it into this scholarly space as the archival documentation of events that had happened before 1897. A good example is the plaque that we have here on the screen. And this plaque was a documentation of a historical event, a war scene of a war that had happened between the Benin Kingdom and a neighboring kingdom, the Igala Kingdom. And what makes this plaque fascinating as an archive of the history of Benin Kingdom is the fact that the historical incidents surrounding this war that have been documented here will be remembered by the Benin people by interacting and viewing this plaque. So for Digital Benin, we decided to explore these routes to look at what does these objects mean to the Benin people as archive, or how are these objects archives of the Benin historical trajectories from the past. Let's take the next slide.
Okay, thank you, Godfrey. So on to the next slide. So within that period between 2022 to 2023, we began to focus on the development of an archive space, as well as the extension of the oral history space that Godfrey will speak about in a minute. And to focus on the archive space, this really focuses on kind of what would traditionally be thought of as archive, so paper-based records as well as photographic collections. And we felt this was important to bring together a source guide, as well as what I will speak about in a minute, which is an archives explorer, which helps to look at digitized material. But we really wanted to create a source guide because we were aware that there was a lot of different archival material and photographic collections that were held in a variety of different institutions around the world. And keeping track of where these collections were was not only difficult for us, but difficult for many researchers and also for the community in Benin City. So we wanted to be able to have a space where we could show on the level of each institution what was held within that institution, where it was, and provide a little bit of additional kind of description and context to help users find out what might be of interest to them, and then also provide links to websites of those institutions, or even perhaps to spaces where those institutions have digitized material. So we really began to, within the source guide, work on 3 levels, which were to include information about the holdings, with more information to kind of direct users, In some cases, alongside that information on the holdings, also provide links and URLs to those other spaces where perhaps the digitized material could be accessed, but also to begin to share the digitized archival and photographic material that was shared with us by those institutions. And that combination of those three levels was really key to us to show not only what was digitized, but actually the kind of breadth of material to help researchers identify what's of interest to them. So in addition to this sort of source guide space, we also have the Archive Explorer, which you can see here. And this, as I said, focuses really on that digitized material. And then in a small number of cases where we haven't made the actual digitized material available online, either because institutions couldn't share it with us for copyright reasons, thinking about photographs, but for various different reasons, we've been able to bring on the digitized material, but also tag that material with different information that then allows users to filter through all of this archival and photographic data. So these filters include document types, which is really things like correspondence, sales catalogs, invoices, so that people can identify if they know exactly what it is that they're looking for. If they want a letter that was written between two people, they can filter in that way. But also by the institution who provided that data. And we also went through this process of identifying who different actors that were either mentioned within the documents themselves or the corresponding metadata that was shared with us. And these actors were identified on the level of the source, so who produced the documentation, the target, so who received that information, thinking about letters if we knew who they were sent to, but then also mentions, so if people or institutions or different actors were mentioned within those documents, we were also identifying them on that level. As well as also the locations of where the material was produced and where we could identify it, also the dates that archival documents or photographs were produced. We were also able, in what was actually quite a surprising number of cases, to identify specific objects and then also object groups, which are based on the Edo designations that our colleague Elagosa worked on. So currently we have digitized material from 50 institutions that you can see here. Within the source guide area that I showed you before, there's listings on about 71 institutions. So we did manage to get quite a large amount of data from different institutions. And just to show you an example of what one of the actual records of a document looks like, this is an example from the National Archives queue. And you can see here in the Digital Benin research pane that we have identified the object that's mentioned in this letter that relates to quite a well-known case relating to the Festac 77 festival, where an ivory Queen Idia mask was requested for loan from the British Museum for the festival in Nigeria, and it was refused. But we've been able to identify the object in the catalogue space, and so that users would be able to navigate between the archive space and into the catalogue. And this was really a continuation of the work that we've been doing with Digital Benin, which is that although we have these 7 spaces, that users can sort of enter through one of those doors into that space, but then be able to navigate between them as their sort of interests take them. And you can also see the actors mentioned, the source, the target, and the mention that you see within those letters. And those actors, there is another tool, which I won't show you today because of time, but you can actually see the networks of actors that we've been able to pull out from these different archival documents. So I will stop there and then pass over to my colleague Godfrey again to speak about his work.
Thank you. On the archival session, one of the institutions that shared archival resources with the Digital Benin team is the Institute for Benin Studies, and where we've created a source guide to a very important archival materials that have been donated to the Institute by the Joseph Nabadomsky family. And these archival documents were records of Nevadomski's fieldwork in Benin between 1979 and 1982. And these records cover the coronation of the former Oba of Benin Kingdom, Oba Erediawa. And also these records include oral history that were collected by Nevadomski from Benin chiefs, the different leaders of different courts, deity, priests, and in particular, or more importantly, we are leaders of the Benin Guilds. And we have this opportunity to bring this archive into a digital space and make it known to the world, and that this archive could be accessible by creating a source guide, digitizing the archive because they were recorded with the cassettes, and then we had to digitize them, make digital copy of these recordings so that now they are in compact disc, and then they are also in retrievable system. And so we can now make them available for researchers in Benin City and in Nigeria who wants to learn about the Benin culture and tradition that have been documented by Joseph Nevadomski. So what you have here is that for each of these 27 cassettes that Nevadomski bequeathed to the Institute for Benin Studies were specific two-side recordings on different subjects. So when we digitized them, we collected the metadata, we have the date of recording, the place, the participants, all of this information are also included in the archive space. That with the source guide, researchers could actually access them by contacting the Institute for Benin Studies on what subject they're interested in. Thank you, Morgan. Also, as stated earlier by Imogen, the Digital Benin project has several spaces. And one of the key spaces for the Digital Benin project is this oral history space. And this oral history space is a combination of oral tradition and oral history, collection of eyewitness accounts and collection of tales and generational stories that have been passed on from one generation to the other. And why is this important? Now I'm speaking to an audience about archive, so I want to approach it from this archive, from the sense of this archive. That, for instance, we showed a plaque, and we said the Benin object, for instance, as an archive. Looking at this object, there are a lot of historical tradition that resonates, that one can recollect. So all of these persons, all of these contributors that we interviewed in the first and second year gave us historical traditions about different historical activities or events in Benin Kingdom. And in the second phase of the project, we had this oral history that we have collected. In the second phase, we'll be linking them to the object. But in the first phase, what we are seeing here are part of the oral history that were collected in the first phase. And all of this also, we regard them as archive because they are a documentation and a record, and they are a documentation of the activities of the kingdom. And as from one generation to the other, these accounts, for instance, the account of the palace politics and struggle for succession between two princes in Benin is narrated by Pa Akpitanyi, who is the seventh on this screen. At the time of presentation, was exactly the same story that have been narrated to Professor Bensil Sadelo, who is fourth on the screen here, about 10 years or 20 years ago. So which means that the people of Benin have documented their own history with their oral tradition. And when they bring out objects and they could say, this is Obaesigi, they're able to relate to you historical tradition that relates to Obaesigi. So the objects, the oral history, are the archive, the documentation for preservation of the tradition of Benin people, because that is what an archive should be, or what it is. The next slide. So having done the first phase of documenting oral history, we decided to interact with this oral history to actually bring it out and show that this historical history that have been preserved with words of mouth can actually be linked to objects that were produced in Benin Kingdom before 1897. So all of the oral history collected in the second phase were brought into an interactive space, so which we have tagged interactive contributions. The first person here is a chief priest in Benin, and he was speaking about the beads in Benin, its uses and functions. And the second group here was a group of chiefs who spoke about a priest in Benin, how the priest functions, and where they were speaking, they were shown a picture of a particular bronze plaque of bronze figure, and they could identify that this bronze plaque represents a chief that belongs to their own guild, that belongs to their own group of palace chiefs. And they could tell you his functions and what he was doing from this documentation. So the Benin objects, as we see them, we have tried as a project team to produce them or present them to the public in a digital space as the archive of the Benin past. All of these contributors, we collected the stories, we collected songs and proverbs, and brought them into an interactive space as archive. And if you look at where we have the timeline, after the timeline, we have these objects, specific objects. Those specific objects are objects that have been mentioned during the course of their narration or during the course of their narrating an experience, or which they themselves mentioned, or object that we have shown. For instance, we gave Patrick Oronsaye about 15 photographs of plaques, and he could do what we call reading the Benin plaque, the Benin bronze plaque. So reading them as an archive, because for the Benin people, the bronze plaques were like a particular bronze plaque was like a page in a book. And every page was a documentation of an event or a documentation of a human figure. Particularly chiefs who were very prominent, chiefs like the Iyase, who can be, in the general sense, described as the prime minister, who was a Benin warlord, and who, of course, lead the people and also can stand and confront the monarch. Such figures had been documented in plaques. And for the Benin people who understand what these plaques represent, they could read these plaques, tell you the persons or the personage that these figures represent, and they could as well recollect and recount historical events that relate to those persons and what period of time. So this is what we've done with this space. Let's take the next slide. And here, you see, this is Patrick Oronsaye, like I just explained. Here he was talking about these drummers. The drummers are called Ikbeman. They belong to a guild in Benin who drums for the monarch during the royal festivals. And then he mentioned the type of drum they were using and the festivals that they performed in. The next slide. Sorry, before this slide, go back, please. Go back, please, Imogen. Okay, you can see that on the right-hand side of the screen, there is object-specific showing Edo iconography, object group. And here, Oronsaye had told us that this is called a medo, the traditional Benin drum. And these belong to an object group in the digital Benin space, which is EMA. And this is how all of the interactive videos, and you could, when you go through the interactive videos, you will see this object displayed on the side, and all of the other details are also on display. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for listening. we'll have more questions. We have more to present, but due to time constraint, what we have presented is a summary of the Digital Benin project in the past 2 years. We're in the 3rd year where we are advancing what we have done into a more elaborate research space. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, guys. Thank you both so much. That was so fascinating. Yeah, just because of time, we'll move on to Dr. Tim Livsey's presentation now, and then we'll go back for some Q&A after that. Thank you both. And thanks, Tim.
Thanks, Jenny. Can you see that and hear me okay? Yeah, brilliant. Okay, hi, everyone. Thanks a lot for coming. I'd really like to thank SCOLMA for the opportunity to contribute to this discussion, and also to Godfrey and Imogen for a really brilliant and fascinating presentation. So thanks for that. Since 2020, I've been working on research about the British so-called migrated archives, which is a collection of 20,000 or so files that British colonial authorities removed from a total of 37 colonized territories at the time they won their independence. And the British government held this collection for decades in little-known government repositories. And on that first slide there, you can see just one of these items, a file that was removed from Nigeria. The British government unambiguously admitted to holding the collection only in 2011 as the result of legal action brought by 5 Kenyans who had suffered horrific abuse from British forces during the 1950s. Most of the removed colonial records were made available to researchers at the UK National Archives from 2012 to 2013, so just over 10 years ago now. My research at the moment has 3 strands. So I'm working on a book about Britain's stolen colonial archives, which is going to cover the period from the 1940s up to the present day. Secondly, I've been working with partner schools to produce secondary school teaching resources about the removed archives to promote understanding and debate about the issue in the UK. And thirdly, I've been working with early career researchers in Nigeria to facilitate their research using the removed archives. And for the rest of the talk, I'm going to focus on the third of these, the work with Nigeria-based researchers. This was a response to the fact that when the migrated archives material was made available at the UK National Archives, it was still effectively inaccessible to many researchers in the countries from which this material had been removed, because of the costs involved in travelling to London, and also because of the UK's harsh and arbitrary visa regime. As a result, most research using the removed colonial archives has been done by researchers based in the global north, and the removed archives were still effectively being kept from most people in the countries where they were created. This was the intention of the colonial officials who originally removed the papers. So this state of affairs effectively perpetuated colonial era inequalities of access to information that have a clear racialized dimension. And this is something that I've discussed further in this journal article. From 2012, when it first received the removed archives, until last year, the UK National Archives didn't seem very interested in addressing these issues, let alone the return of the removed colonial files. And this posed the question, what would researchers based in the countries from which they were removed, but who are unable to visit London, make of the removed colonial archives? What new questions and perspectives might they bring to bear on this still inaccessible material? So the principle behind this work was to do something which would make this removed this removed colonial era archival material available to 6 early career researchers based in Nigeria who were interested in using it to address their own research questions, and which might also promote more wide-ranging and inclusive debate about removed colonial artifacts. The work focused on Nigeria because of the networks developed there while working on earlier research about histories of universities in urban space. And the Removed Archives project for early career researchers was devised in collaboration with 2 organisations, the Lagos Studies Association, a pioneering group which brings together academics and others with interests in Nigerian society, history and culture, and also IFRA Nigeria, a French research institute. And I'm extremely grateful to colleagues at these 2 organisations for their very important contributions to this project. The concept developed in an application for UK Arts and Humanities Research Council funding was that we would first of all advertise for expressions of interest and then select 6 Nigeria-based researchers. We would also photograph all of the material removed from Nigeria held at the UK National Archives, which comprises just over 400 files that mainly focus on the late colonial period leading up to Nigerian independence in 1960. It covers issues like constitutional negotiations, the so-called Nigerianization of the civil service, and economic development. Then the 6 selected researchers would be able to request any of these files relevant to their research interests, which we would transfer using the online platform WeTransfer. We'll make payments to the 6 to cover the costs of their data usage on the project and make available a programme of research support, pairing each early career researcher with a more established researcher to advise on their ongoing work in monthly online meetings. 5 established scholars agreed to take on this work, and I'm very grateful to them again for their ongoing work on this project. Finally, we would pay for registration, travel and accommodation for the 6 researchers to attend the Lagos Studies Association conference to present their work in progress using the removed archives. So the project was funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council in 2022, and the section of the work focusing on Nigeria-based researchers started last summer in 2023. So we started off by advertising for expressions of interest. We held launch events at the University of Ibadan, hosted by IFRA, which is the event pictured here. The standing figure in purple is Professor Abiola Abioye of the University of Ibadan, who gave a brilliant talk about the migrated archives issue. We also did a launch event at the 2023 Lagos Studies Conference. And then we selected 6 researchers who were interested in using migrated archives material and paired them with 6 more established researchers. There isn't time really to discuss all 6 projects now, but if you'll like to learn more, there are further details on the project website, the name of which is at the bottom of this page if you're interested. So last August, we transferred the requested migrated files selected by these 6 early career researchers. And since then, each pair of early career and more established researchers has been meeting regularly online to discuss the files and also to prepare a presentation on their work in progress for the June 2024 Lagos Studies Association conference in a few months' time. So at the conference this June, we'll hold 2 panels where the Nigeria-based researchers will give their presentations drawing on the removed archives. So we're currently mid-project. Beyond that, we're keen to support the 6 researchers in using the removed archives material in their theses, dissertations, and future publications. So the project aims to facilitate the development and articulation of Nigerian perspectives on a body of material that was, of course, originally created in Nigeria, but was then removed to the UK. So to conclude, this is a small project. It's an ad hoc, rough and ready, and very limited effort to respond to the issues raised by the colonial era displacement of archives. It's certainly a far from perfect response to these issues, but over the last few months, it's been a way to direct some funds from the UK Arts and Humanities Research Council to Nigeria-based early career researchers, to make the removed documents available, at least in a digital form, and hopefully to promote further debate about the future of these removed colonial archives. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tim. That was really fascinating as well.